Hello and welcome to Real Men Feel. I'm your host, author, coach, and healer, Andy Grant. Please visit theandygrant.com to learn more about me. Real Men Feel reminds men that they are human beings and have the right to experience and, more importantly, express all of their emotions. My guest today is Markus Kasunich. Markus is a holistic life and relationship coach, keynote speaker, author, facilitator, and mentor. This week, we go deep into the goal of knowing thyself. Markus talks about his near-death experience at age 11 and the open fluidity of consciousness he experienced, as well as the 17 years it took to integrate that experience, which resulted in his IRAM model to understand and navigate human conditioning. We discuss doing the inner work, expansion and contraction, and experience chasers. Markus shares what brings him closest to that mystical near-death experience he had as a child and the two things he wished all men knew. Let's do it. Hello, Markus, and welcome to Real Men Feel.
Thank you. It's so awesome to be here.
We've talked a lot for years, and I had to look back to see how long it's been. So we first spoke about you being on Real Men Feel back in August of 2022.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I think we both canceled, we both had different things show up, and it kept moving, bopping, and then I stopped for a year in between all there. So it was a very interesting experience, but since Real Men Feel has recently won two awards, two Signal Silver Awards, one for Most Inspirational Podcast and Best Self-Help Self-Improvement Podcast, I would like to give you an award of, the longest wait award doesn't sound very exciting. You get the Most Persistent Guest Award.
Fair enough.
So Markus, I know you first of all, you do a lot. And amongst that is author, coach, speaker, influencer, teacher, artist, father, husband, facilitator, and seeker. I imagine that seeking came first. So what prompted young Markus to begin seeking?
It was a near-death experience, actually. At 11 years old, I was born in Canada, Ontario, which is Southern Ontario, which is, for those Americans that are listening, it's north of New York State, not far from Buffalo. And so winter, in the wintertime, it's cold, it's lots of snow, and especially in my youth. And we had one of those A-frame swing sets in the backyard. And we would, as kids, we would climb on it. In the wintertime, the snow drifts would go over it. And then you would try to climb over it. Now I was doing that and accidentally slipped, caught my hood on the hook of one of those bolts that was sticking out, and watched myself go into the entire death experience and watched myself die, and came out on the other side, meaning like on the other side, and watching my lifeless body hang on this swing set. Eventually, my father, who was looking from the window, I was about 11 years old. My father came, saw it for the window, and ran out, grabbed me, and in his intuitive kind of like emergency things, drew a bath. Had my mother draw a bath, and they submerged me in the bath. And when they put me in the tepid water, I came back into my body. Now, when I came back, and a lot of people talk about these, you've probably heard these experiences before, where people talk about it as a mystical experience. It was a mystical experience. Don't get me wrong. On the other side, I experienced what it was like to have no conditioning, right? And total clarity. Now, this is a thing for a lot of people. They talk about, on the other side, there's this immediate kind of involvement in consciousness. That was not the case. And I've talked to a lot of people who've had this experience. The consciousness you're in when you leave this plane is the consciousness you are on the other side. But I had no conditioning, no human psychology that was present anymore. So there was this kind of depth of clarity, lack of fear, and a profound feeling of this infinite kind of love that I don't think I've ever experienced or could describe in human words ever in any case that I've ever, nothing comes close to it. And so when I came back, having had that experience, the context of having no conditioning and then being shoved back into the human form, two things happened. One, immediately the first thought out of my head as an 11-year-old was, oh my God, this is life. Meaning I'm back here. And I'm back here in this little conditioned, like, all the different parts of my conditioning and layers and dynamics and habits and all that stuff is there. The human part of Markus was there. And also the other thing is there was the chip that was kind of in our consciousness that divides all the worlds, that somehow got completely fried in me. And then I had this extreme experience of fluidity, energetics, emotions, spirits, energy. I could feel intensely my parents' fear. I could hear things that I think they were thinking, but I didn't have the experience at 11 years old to be able to like really kind of integrate what that was, because an 11-year-old consciousness doesn't understand. So it took me about 17 years to be able to even integrate the experience. But instantly what that did when I came back, and now I have this context of experiencing something completely different than life and then coming back into life, you could never really see it the same way. So instantly in that moment, I would say that immediately created me as a seeker, because now I have this completely different experience that seems not to be the case. And my experience of reality is different than everyone around me. I have this understanding, or at least this echo of a memory of having total clarity. And so instantly I had this intense fascination with the human condition, because I recognized that when I came back into my field or into my body, that this thing was now online. This human psychology was now online. And I was like, I need to understand this. Now, I can't say I articulated it that way at 11, but as I started getting older, I started saying more and more and more, what is this thing that we all filter our experience through that tends to be the way we engage? And how do I meet somebody who can help me see, or at least talk through this, that I see the world in a completely different way than everybody else around me? In fact, I actually thought that if anyone found out what I saw, how I saw, and the perspective of what my reality was like, that they would put me in a mental institution. So I was really kind of quiet about it as I was trying to figure this out, but that instantly made me a seeker. I wanted to seek and understand human psychology. So I went to school to study psychology. Then that wasn't enough. Psychology didn't answer the questions. So then I started seeking teachers, gurus, mystics, shamans, anybody, anywhere, at any point who could give me some perspective on how it was that my version of reality was so vastly different, and to kind of work through and integrate how I was going to work with that.
Wow. So I get that being on the other side of the there's no fear, it's clarity, it's peaceful. But when you came back and said, oh, this is life, did you feel the conditioning? Did it take hold?
Yeah.
You could just recognize, okay.
Wow. It was like being shoved into a tiny little box after having been in the vast expansiveness of the universe. And there was something about it that was really, that was the catalyst for me to understand, okay, wait a second. What I recognized was, even in that moment, I'm like, I'm feeling so much. And now I have to make the distinction of what's my environment that I'm feeling, what's me that I'm feeling, what is this that's on board in my psychology, because I just experienced total clarity. So what is this? So that drove me to deeply start to explore and become super fascinated with not only the mystical, but also the human interface that interprets the mystical, right?
So one thing I always wonder, people that have the near-death experience and they experience the other side and post-consciousness, post-life, whatever the proper term might be, do you get the sense that you shouldn't have had that experience? Like you saw behind the veil that humans aren't meant to? Or does it feel like a gift and it was meant for you?
I always, the question, which is an alignment that most people ask around that, is, did you have a choice to come back? Could you have stayed there? And my experience, the way I would define it is, it's a choiceless choice. Meaning, as an 11-year-old, all of my identification was to this realm, to this human reality, to this 3D experience. So I didn't have I didn't have any way to really translate that into something more. And did it feel meant to happen? I didn't feel like it was a gift, but I didn't also feel like that it was not supposed to happen. So my experience was, because it was so catastrophic and it unraveled my whole reality. There's a severity in coming back and having to deal with that, right? So gift was not the word I would use, but that was meant to happen. I would say, yeah, I would say that in some level, this all played in, whether it was orchestrated by consciousness or not, it played in for me to become the person I was going to become, because here I am 30 years later, still talking about that experience, right? So obviously it had an impact, and it motivated a kind of driven desire to understand what the human condition is in a way that I don't think anything else could have. That kind of drove me into this kind of seeking path. So in that sense, yeah, I think it was meant to happen. And I mean, we can't really understand all the intricacies of the patterns and the fabric of consciousness, so it's hard for me to go there. But I certainly feel like at this point, after having integrated that and now seeing that as, I do see it as a gift, but at the time, no, it was a burden. I felt deeply, deeply terrified. You have all your ordinary conditioning, and then you have on top of that, I had this open fluidity of consciousness, which was not an easy thing to integrate, right? Which was what made, contentment never created a seeker. So if you're content, you're not seeking in the first place. So I was seeking something, some answers, some understanding, because there was this agitation and now I was in relationship with something different.
So with the near-death experience, with your experience of, love that term, the fluidity of consciousness, how would you define the human condition?
I would define the human condition that is really the ego structure. It's the personality structure that we have, right? And a lot of people talk about killing the ego and wanting to get rid of it. For me, this is a necessary interface that allows us to experience a uniqueness in our human experience. We filter that divine consciousness through this human experience, which creates the unique personality of Andy, of Markus, of Frank, of Jill, of whoever, right? And through that uniqueness, we get to learn through our human psychology structure, we get to learn and interface and be able to integrate more of our relationship to the little self, right? To the little self. And so for me, the human experience is not only in my world, we're a spiritual being having a human experience, but that human interface is that personality structure. And it is also my opinion that, having been around spiritual communities for the last 30 plus years, that is one of the areas that people do not go in terms of understanding and learning about themselves, because whatever spiritual experience you have in your life, it's going to be filtered and interpreted through the maturity of your relationship with that psychological structure. So if you don't have a relationship to it, then you're minimizing the depth of the richness of the experience you can have when you have these exalted experiences or openings of consciousness. So the human part of me is that filter, that human psychology filter. For me, that's what I would define as the human condition.
A challenge I see often in people that have a spiritual awakening of some sort, they really accept their spirituality, their divinity, the consciousness flow, connected to everything, and then they try to stop being physical and stop being human. And
Exactly.
No, like I said, we're both. And as
Right.
you open up to more of one end, as you discover, as you seek, it doesn't mean you stop being both.
100%. And this
Cool.
is the thing. A lot of people, they bounce between that, like spiritual relative. But even if you look at the definitions of consciousness from ancient Sanskrit teachings, the consciousness is made up of two different qualities: emptiness, which is beyond all human experience. We can't understand it. Our mind can't wrap itself around it. In shamanic circles, they call it the void. In non-dualistic experiences, they'll call it this empty, or this quiet, or this space energy. And then there's relative, which is all action. So that's like the Shiva Shakti. Shiva is this emptiness and this certainty beyond the human experience. And then Shakti is the activity of the relative world. Now, consciousness is made up of both. Both of those things have to be present. If you're bouncing between both of them, then you're not getting a rich integration of a full experience of what reality could be, because both of those are who we are in terms of, and that's what makes us such unique, interesting beings in terms of our relationship to this other that's so beyond human, and then the human interpretation and experience all wrapped together. I mean, we're fascinating creatures, right?
At times. Well, I guess so. Yeah. And again, if I think of Mr. Spock, yeah, it's always fascinating, but it's sometimes terrifying to be in it, I guess. Right?
Indeed, not necessarily comfortable, but
Mm.
certainly not boring. I
Yeah.
mean, the relative world is just imbued with activity. And so I feel like the deepest kind of integration we can have is a connection to that other, that's something beyond the human experience, beyond manifestation, the unmanifested, something that is intangible and cannot really be understood by the mind. And then this relative human experience, which allows us the ability to interface with this divine other quality and translate it into our experience as a human being.
Okay. So from our most recent conversation about you being a guest, we had decided we would focus on what is inner work, because that's a term that's out there. Inner
Yes.
work, inner child, healing your core wounds, all these sort of buzzwords and phrases that are out there in the seeking community, in the spiritual growth, personal growth worlds. Can you tell me what most people see as inner work, and perhaps what you see as true inner work?
Sure. I would say that most people in an uninformed place see inner work as experience. They'll have these experiences, and they will then have this experience will open up or clear or facilitate a deeper understanding or a deeper connection to what is within you. And in some ways, they think that that experience is a form of inner work, and it is to a degree, but it's incomplete without some cognitive understanding, in my opinion, right? So for me, inner work is being able to look at that human personality structure and get really, really intimate with it, understand the conditioning of what's in there, because we are all conditioned by the time we're 7 years old. It's been proven by the time you're about 7 and 9 years old, you already have all your habitual conditioning that you would have received from your family of origin, your culture, and where your kind of your influences. So that is going to inform how you engage with everything else, including all of those openings into consciousness. So for me, the depth of inner work that I see is missing in the spiritual world and in the world of self-development too, is going deep into the personality structure and understanding how you tick as a conditioned human being, because that's going to inform everything on some level, unconsciously or consciously. So I think that's the piece that's often missing in the spiritual seeking. And so I always define it as relative sadhana, because it's about learning and understanding how that works. And for me, I didn't understand it. I just knew that it was there because I had that experience. So then I went on this journey to go deep inside of that conditioning and find a way to map it so that I could work with it and understand, because ultimately when I was in that moment, I could feel everything. There was this unity feeling when I came back into this relative form, but I could also feel what's me and what am I are tuning into around me, the people around me. And the more deeply you understand your own conditioning, the more informed you are, the more clear you are, the better your engagements are with people, and to understand what's influencing your unconscious behavior transforms all of your relationships on every level of your being. If you want a conscious relationship, you got to have a conscious relationship with yourself.
Right. Cool. Yeah, it reminds me of, so I'm an initiate with the Modern Mystery School, and the core of that is the mission of being an initiate is to know thyself.
All levels.
And it goes back to the Temple of Delphi. Boom.
Exactly. Yeah. The beautiful place, by the way, I visited there. Amazing energy. Amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So the big self and the little self, right? So there's the big self is that other, and the little self is that, I guess what people call it the ego structure, right? And it is the ego structure, but it's a necessary component because it's our human interface. It's how you and I as people engage in our uniqueness and create relationship. So if you don't understand how that thing works, or how you've been conditioned, or how to work with it, then, I mean, aren't you in some ways being influenced by all the conditioning unconsciously that you've not explored? And some level that's becomes what's kind of feeding into your relationships.
Yep. Yeah. So many programs and teachers and books out there will act like it's almost like the ego's a mistake. Like, oh, you shouldn't have it. Got to get rid of it. It's just this broken thing. It doesn't serve a purpose, but it does. Yeah, it's valuable. And the key, when you understand it and what conditioned it, perhaps what's distorted its best things. But the ego is really, its job is to keep us safe.
Yeah, it's to keep us
and often
safe.
being a seeker isn't safe. to grow and expand doesn't feel safe, at least. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, because you have to push to your far into your comfort zone, right? So you know that when you're pushing to that unknown space that you're going to hit your paradigm, and then it's going to challenge all of these perceived understandings, conscious or unconscious, about who you are. So for me, that structure is a powerful and necessary thing to understand. And so I went in, I mean, how this happened was I spent a year in the forest in the mountains of British Columbia on a vision quest. I come from a native background. So for me, going into the forest wasn't too big of a deal, but a year was, even in my culture, was extreme. And I spent a year with living on the land, and all I had with me was my journal. And I was alone for, I think the longest time I was alone, I was about a year that I was on this trek, but I was alone like the longest stint without seeing people for about 3 months. And when you start getting alone and now you have nothing to project, all of those issues and conditioning, no people, and you're in this experience where you're really in your own conditioning and you can see it, I started journaling like crazy, everything that was coming up in me. I didn't have the tools or the understanding in my early 20s what was going on, but I understood that I needed to really map, or at least observe, how this thing was running. And so that was how I started to build a kind of, or at least translate how I saw the world in a way that I could kind of use it as a tool to help people to go in and to understand that conditioning. And again, here's the thing, Andy, most people talk about inner work. I think people want to do it. Like, I think as beings, there's something in us that drives us to want to do this, to know thyself, right? But I don't think we have adequate tools in our modern day society, which is why you end up in programs like initiate programs like the mystery school and doing other things, because we're looking for a way, we're looking for a system, we're looking for a map. On any journey, we're looking for a map to kind of navigate how are we going to have a relationship with this inner world.
Yeah. So most people are having experiences, it raises their awareness, and that's where they stop. So they're not getting the full value. They don't realize how, right, a whole group, group of 20 people have the same experience, but it's all different based on their ego, based on their conditioning of what they take from it, how they view it, how they interpret it, what they do going forward. And used, I wasn't familiar with this term, but you used a term called experience chasers. Going after one more journey, one more ayahuasca trip, one more thing is what I'm missing. And again, and I was in that for years too, that the chasing the tail, just going in circles as opposed to spiraling upward in growth, just chasing, there's one more wound. There's one more inner childish. I gotta keep looking in the past. I gotta keep, digging up the stuff I thought I've already gone over. I must be missing something. So your vision quest, your mapping of your inner world, does your map translate to all humans?
I studied psychology in university because of that. That was that driving interest in the human condition, and discovered, to me, there was a ceiling as to how far I could go in terms of the understanding of the psychological model. And for me, the map I created was not only the way I view the world, but was a way for me to kind of work in a comprehensive way with that inner world. And I can kind of break it down how I broke it down. First of all, the model I created is based on expansion and contraction. Because, we spend a lot of time talking about good, bad, right, wrong, black, white. We live in a dualistic reality, so that's going to be the nature of how we understand things through comparison. But when we go into the right, wrong thing, we immediately start with moral. There's a moral overlay on that, right? So when you talk in terms of expansion and contraction, you're now talking energetically. You're talking about an energetic relationship, a vibrational relationship. And so then it becomes what I resonate to and what I don't resonate to, rather than that's good and that's bad, or that's right and that's wrong, which for me takes out the moral fabric of that, which makes it just about observing your relationship to the vibrational reality that we are. So for me, I broke it down. The expansion is radiant and mature. So the radiant inner child is an aspect of the expansive side of your inner child, and the mature inner adult is those two pieces put together. Radiance and maturity create the expansive energy, and below the line is contraction, which is the wounded inner child, and the shadow inner adult. Now, none of it is wrong. Like every human being has a fragmented psychology. There's not one human being, and I've been around. I lived in an ashram for 11 years and was a personal assistant to many enlightened beings. So I traveled the world with these enlightened beings, and I'm telling you, they all have egos, all of them. There's no such thing as transcending the ego. You integrate it. And the way you integrate it is not through denying it, making it wrong, or just ignoring that it's there. It's through understanding. And that's the model I created, how contraction, the wounded inner child in the shadow, how you're conditioned, what you're conditioned with and what it looks like. And then on above the line, how you are conditioned with radiance and maturity. So for me, I broke it down into 26 archetypal stories that we could then start mapping how to deal with your inner world, which the whole point of this book or what I was writing was to create a model to make it easier to go inside. Because what I observed is in this world, very few people had an adequate map. Right. I believe that I've now been using the map for 20 years with my clients, coaching, written books, done courses. So I know that and I've seen what it does in terms of giving people the awareness of how not only to engage with the conditioning what's there, but know what to cultivate in order to use medicine, what I call medicine, for when you're in a contractive state or a wound comes up, how to meet that in a way, right? A lot of people think healing means getting rid of your conditioning, and it isn't. It means having a more conscious relationship to the conditioning that you have. Your conditioning is not going away. Everyone wants it to make it go away as one of those faux pas in the spiritual self-development world. It's like, I want to make the pain go away. I want to make the conditioning go away. You're better off to deeply understand how the conditioning works so that when it arises in you and there's a trigger in the outer world, you know how to meet it with awareness, with maturity, with connection, with expansiveness, and with medicine.
When you first journaled your map and discovered how to travel your world, has it changed or has it remained true and accurate?
I would say that it hasn't changed that much.
Yeah.
In when the original kind of mapping of it, which really was mapping my inner dialogue to see all these different voices that are inside of us and to understand how the different qualities and worked and kind of give them names. I mean, there's nuances to how it's changed working with clients for the last 15 or 20 years, but fundamentally, the map still holds true. And I'm constantly looking for flaw in it so that I can create and refine it. So there's refinements in terms of the nuances, but I would say that the map itself still serves and has served as a very powerful tool for people to at least get into the process of self-awareness through introspection and understanding your conditioning.
Right. So what is this map called?
Oh, I call it IRAM, which is inner relationship archetypal model, and it's a map for creating conscious relationships. So the more conscious and more connected you are to your own conditioning will be the level of conscious and awareness that you can have in every relationship around you. You can't have a relationship that's more conscious than you have in the relationship with yourself. And the most intimate relationship you'll ever have on this planet is the relationship with yourself, right? That know thyself experience, which is the foundation of so many spiritual teachings.
How did you first share IRAM? Was it your book, a workshop, one-on-one? How did it translate to others?
I would say my first case studies were my family. Because I was starting to do this process. And really, I didn't create a model. All I did was narrate how I see the world. So when I look at a human being, I look at a human being fundamentally is fragmented. And when you talk to somebody, they're speaking through a filter. They're speaking through an archetype. They're speaking through a story. They're speaking through an aspect, a quadrant of their conditioning. So you could talk to somebody who's deeply in their wounds and they're speaking through the wounded inner child. And there's different qualities and different kind of storylines of the inner child: neediness, overdramatic, frozen, lost, overindulged, misunderstood, all these different qualities. So you could, as you become more and more adept in understanding your own conditioning, you could see that individuals are speaking through a specific quadrant of their consciousness. They're either speaking to the shadow, right? Control, possessiveness, unavailability, enabling, all these different aspects of the shadow, or they're speaking through their woundedness when they're below the line in contraction, or they're speaking from expansiveness through the radiant inner child, creativity, magic, playfulness, giftedness, feeling, or they're speaking through the mature part of them consciousness, which is, availability, nurturing, compassion, your protector, the responsible adult. There's these different qualities that every human being's speaking through. So I think as I was a child, I was witnessing how people were speaking through this fragmented part, and an unevolved, fragmented individual is like popcorn. They bounce around to all these different things. Somebody who has an awareness, has a stability, and can kind of track how and where things are coming and what place they're speaking from. When you know where someone's speaking from, then you know how to address them and meet them in a way that's very expansive, right? So for me, it was a practice. I was already doing this with all the people in my family. My first case studies were my family. And then in my when I started developing the material, I started using it with my coaching clients. And then we did retreats. And then I practiced it and tested it for 10 years before I wrote the book.
If it's about states of expansion and contraction,
right?
Are we constantly moving back and forth? No human stays in expansion or stays in contraction.
Correct.
Or do they?
I mean, I would say that, it's a natural ebb and flow, right? Expansion and contraction is the essence of energy. Energy is expansive or contractive. Those are the two states. So we're kind of modeling the vibrational reality of constantly, we're either in expansiveness or contractiveness. And I think we move depending on what our outside catalysts are and our inside conditioning, we get triggered into expansive experiences and contractive experiences. The question most people ask me is, can I stay in expansion all the time? And I think you can cultivate deeper relationships with everything above the line, right? With your maturity and your radiance. And the more you cultivate that relationship, the more you'll stay in that experience. The gravity of that awareness will keep you above the line. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have stuff that comes up, but when it comes up, you have the ability and tools to meet that experience, to meet those wounds, to meet those issues, to meet that stuff that comes up in you with medicine and understanding on how to relate to it in an expansive way. So even if you have a contractive experience, you can still meet it in an expansive way. So the answer is yes, we're always going back and forth between expansion and contraction. And the more consciousness you have, the more awareness you have, the more integrated you are in your personality, the easier it is to stay in an expansive state. And it is a choice. Right. It is a choice.
The time spent in contraction can become momentary as opposed to decades, depending on your response, on your reaction to it.
And you and I both know, having done a ton of healing work, that you could get really deeply stuck in the wound, right? And sometimes that's appropriate as part of the process of having to work through it. But there is a point where even if you're getting deep in your process of understanding the dark parts, of the shadow parts, of the wounded parts of your conditioning, that at some point you're going to have to meet it differently. And that's where the tools and the medicine help you to make a choice to stay above the line, cultivate those parts of you above the line. See, the way I built it is, or the way I kind of understand this is, the conditioning that we get, the set conditioning that's shadow and woundedness, it's there. It's not changing. It's not going away. But everything above the line, radiance, all the radiant child aspect parts of yourself and all the mature aspects of yourself, that can all be cultivated. So the more you cultivate that stuff above the line, the easier it is to stay above the line, because the gravity of that energy just keeps you there.
Right. Like attracts like. Your radiant energy is attracting more radiant energy and experiences. And yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. Because one among many mistakes I made in my early seeking and growth opportunities, I thought any mentor I had was perfect. I thought I was flawed and broken and they were perfect. So that I was making the mistaken assumption that they were staying in radiant expansion all the time. And anytime I had that experience, like, oh my God, this is what life is really supposed to be. And then I'd have a period of contraction. I'm like, I did it wrong. I'm back where I started. And I just want to just like that. Is that ever the case? Are you really back where you started, or is it just something else is coming up for you?
I don't think you can ever go backwards. I mean, that's like kind of like, it's like, you can't unring the bell. right? So I don't feel like there's a point in any process where you go back to revert back to where you were. Because even if you revert back to where you think you were before, you've already touched something else. So then your experience of where you went back to will never be the same. So I don't think it's possible to unevolve and de-evolve, or whatever word we want to use, to put us back to where we were. I think we create the perception of that, and we may revisit the same patterning, right? But if you're revisiting the pattern, the second time you see the pattern, or the third time you see the pattern, or the fourth time you see the pattern, will never be the same, because there's experience, there's understanding, there's integration that happens every single time. So you're never ever going back to where you were before.
So you've mentioned medicine a number of times. So I want to get clear. Like, so what are you referring to when you talk about medicine and helping this journey?
Well, let's talk about it from this perspective. Let's just assume you are you're talking to an individual who's deeply needy, right? They're coming from the fragment of that wounded child. They're speaking through the archetype of the needy child. And then as an individual, how do you meet that with an expansive energy? Well, neediness is all about not having your needs met. It's a touchy word, because nobody wants to be considered needy, right? Because you see like the sucky person who's trying to draw attention. We get the classic needy individual. But if you look at the word needy, it means you didn't get your needs met. And so then when you look at what's the medicine in my own consciousness, if I find my neediness, or in another individual, how do I meet that in an expansive way? It's, well, what is the medicine for neediness? Nurturing, because you weren't nourished. So if you're nourishing an individual, you show up in a nourishing energy, which is the mature inner adult kind of archetype. You show up as compassion, which is a deep empathetic understanding of somebody's pain, right? You have compassion for what's going on. So you show up as compassion, you show up as nurturing. That's a medicine that starts to dissolve that feeling of neediness and invite somebody to come back above the line. So you can invite somebody who shows up to you in neediness. If you show up in the expansive energy of nourishment and nurturing and honoring and all the different things, that creates an invitation for somebody to take them to step from below the line to above the line. It doesn't mean they're going to accept the invitation, but you're showing up as the medicine, which that's what I call the medicine, the antidote for that kind of conditioning. And that applies to all the different aspects of the shadow and the woundedness. And I spent, like I said, years like really exploring what is the medicine for all these things, and how do you meet these expansive, these contractive elements that come up in you. Because somebody could show up as needy and you could show up in a very judgmental way, right? That's not medicine for the experience. That's feeding more contraction. So if the objective is to be an expansive energy, then when somebody shows up in a needy space, or someone shows up in a controlling space, or someone shows up in an overdramatic space, eventually when you learn to integrate and understand these tools, you also understand how to meet an individual in the most expansive place, which will create the deepest kind of intimacy instead of meeting in that contractive place.
So if this is really resonating with someone, they really, interested in the inner world, looking for guidance, looking for the model, what's the best starting point? Is it your book? Is it something else with you, or?
The book is fantastic. I mean, in the sense it's 333 pages. Originally, it was 999, and my editor was like, "No, you're going to kill people. You need to cut it down." So he cut it down to like 150 pages, and then I put it back up to 333 because I just felt like there had to be some stuff in there with the tools. So the book is a good way, at the very least, to create a map for you to start inner work. Because if you can't listen, if someone says to me, I've heard this all the time, Andy, I'm doing shadow work. And I'm like, I go, fantastic. What are you doing? And they can't articulate it.
Yeah.
Then I ask them, well, if you can't articulate the actual shadow work you're doing, then are you sure you're doing anything? Or is it as effective as it can be? Because if you're working on a specific part of your consciousness, you should be able to articulate what it is you're working on, right? So I find this, I often, people say, I'm doing inner child work. And I'm like, fantastic. You're doing inner child work. Are you doing radiant inner child work? Or are you doing wounded inner child work? Because they're completely different medicine and different things for both sides of that, the expansive side of the inner child or the contractive side of the inner child. So what I did was make it more comprehensive and create languaging and tools around it. So the book is a good starting point. It's based as a workbook. It's created to give you tools to journal. It gives you affirmations. It gives you an understanding. And then what a lot of people end up doing is they start the book, they start mapping their consciousness, and then they end up in a session. They're like, I want to go deeper into this process and understand it. I do this with a lot of couples because, a lot of couples end up in their relationship with each other. The reason they have issues is because they don't understand their own conditioning, and then they're just projecting conditioning on each other. Yeah. So when you can understand your own conditioning and the conditioning of your partner, my God, does it ever change the way you engage with each other? You could show up as the medicine for each other. You understand what your tendencies are, what your partner's tendencies are. You don't have judgment for the fact that every human being has this fragmented consciousness, which I think is a gift, quite frankly, because that fragmented consciousness gives us the opportunity to explore all these facets of who we are and then integrate them into this integrated being where you're aware and you're having a conscious relationship with your inner world.
Of all the things that you do and have done, what's your favorite?
I would say to you, I have a deep love. I have a deep and devotion and fascination with the human condition. But for me personally, the most powerful, intense, beautiful experiences have always been in terms of meditation and deepening in experiences of consciousness, because that connects me to something outside of that I touched in my youth, in that experience, something other than the human condition. And then when that's on board and I have a conscious relationship with that, that affects the way I view and filter through my human experience. So for me personally, going into deep spiritual experiences of touching that place beyond the human conditioning gives me a kind of awakened experience that connects me to what it was like on the other side.
So is deep meditation the closest you can get in your actual human existence to that experience at 11 years old?
That's a good question. Meditation's a tool, but I have had spontaneous experiences of that through the course of my life. Because once that's activated and open, now it's in you and it's alive. So now it gets activated in different experiences. I've had it activated through ecstasy and through energetic experiences. I've had this profound connection activated through deep and profound meditation. And I've had it activated through cognitive understanding of my conditioning. So I don't think there's one place where it shows up more than the other. I think it's just about being available as a human being and being deeply intimate with all these different things that are happening with us. And then having a communion where that can inform you in a different way. And so the deeper you go into that space, the more you're going to be informed by something other, more and beyond this human experience.
So since this is Real Men Feel, is there anything that stands out in all that you've studied, experienced? Is there anything that stands out as one thing you wish more men knew?
Yes, I wish two things. One, it starts because one of the reasons I even approached your podcast and we kind of connected in the first place, where we connected was because I was so excited by the title of your podcast, Real Men Feel, because feeling is emotional. The experience of your emotional body is the entry point to consciousness, because consciousness is a direct experience. And if you don't understand how to tap in and actually feel in a visceral, somatic way, then it's very difficult to go deeper into your intuition and even deeper into another experience. So feeling the emotional experience of connecting and not just being able to talk about your feelings, but being able to talk from within the feeling as you're having it. A lot of people talk about their feelings, they can analyze their feelings, but when you're talking, when it's a live experience and you're able to communicate from that space, that is incredibly profound, powerful, and it opens the door for you to have a deeper experience of consciousness, because that's direct experience in action. So I wish more men had access to tools to teach them how to not only feel and how to understand that as an experience in the body, but then to be able to articulate that with kind of sophistication, because that will allow you to be deeper and more intimate in all your relationships.
Completely agree. Awesome. So you said two things.
The second thing I feel is the understanding of your conditioning. Because I feel like a lot of men do not understand why they do what they do. And I mean, this goes for men, but it goes for any human being. The more deeply you're connected to who you are, the more integrated you are, the more rich your experience are, the more rich your relationships are, and the more the depth of what you can experience as this reality is unfathomable. That's all dependent on you having a deeper relationship with self. It's an inside job. It's always been an inside job. It always will be an inside job. Yes, we get catalysts in the outer world, but the inner work, is an inside desire to know thyself.
Awesome, Marcus. I've enjoyed every conversation I've had with you. So I had a high bar for this conversation, and it's you're hitting it. What is the best way for people to stay in touch with you, to keep up with all that you're up to?
Well, I'm on social media, so you can find me on social media, which all the links I think will be in the thing. Also, they can connect on the website. They can definitely connect and have sessions. I do private sessions as well as different events all over the country and different countries as well. So there's always events going on in person and online. So if they connect through my website, they connect through the book, you will find ways to kind of meet me and see if I'm a fit to be able to help facilitate your journey into your inner world.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Marcus. That you've won the coveted Most Persistent Guest Award, and I look forward to having more conversations with you. And I want to thank everyone for listening and joining us as well, and being willing and wanting to explore your inner world and to know yourself, because I think that's a key point of this entire experience to begin with. So thanks again, Marcus, for joining us. Thanks for listening. Wherever you're discovering Real Men Feel, please subscribe, follow, like, share this episode with someone who would get value from it, post a review or a comment. Please visit realmenfeel.org, see the blog post for this episode. We'll have links to all the resources mentioned. You can get Marcus's book, connect to his website, and dig deeper into all of that fun stuff that you are. And if you're not yet in the Real Men Feel private Facebook group, or maybe you didn't even know that existed, you can join by visiting realmenfeel.org/group. And you can always reach out to me directly at realmenfeel@gmail.com. And until next time, be good to yourself.